The latter half of the 19th century involved increasing interaction and conflict with white settlers and Native Americans, especially in the Great Plains. The Great Plains region of the United States is a grassland extending across the west central part of the United States. Many of the tribal peoples in the Great Plains were nomads. They gathered food and hunted buffalo. Some of these tribes included the Cheyenne and Sioux. Once the Spanish brought horses and guns to the native peoples, the tribes became more mobile. These Native Americans lived in teepees made from buffalo hides and relied on buffalo also for clothing, shoes, and food. The buffalo were essential to native life on the Great Plains. As far as family life, the Native Americans lived in extended family groups where kinship was key to life. Men became hunters and warriors, whereas the women butchered the game and prepared the hides. The Plains Indian tribes believed spirits controlled the natural world. Men and women who showed sensitivity to spirits became medicine men or women or shamans. Tribal leaders ruled by council rather than as a dominant leader, and land was communal for the whole tribe. White settlers came into conflict with natives mostly over land. Settlers believed land could be privately owned. They contended that Native Americans did not own the territory of the Great Plains because they did not settle and improve the land. Therefore, many people migrated from the east to claim territory that many native people lived on. The predominant reason for a rush of new settlers was the prospect of striking it rich from silver and gold mining. The push of settlers into the plains and the west resulted in the arrival of railroads across the plains and therefore impacted the government's policy towards Native Americans. Originally, the Great Plains was open as one giant Native American reservation, or land that was set aside for native tribes. However, that policy changed in the 1850s, sometimes with tragic results. One tragic event occurred in 1864 at Colorado's Sand Creek Reserve. Most of the Cheyenne went to the Sand Creek for the winter, believing that they were under the protection of the United States government. General Curtis, the U.S. Army commander in the West, sent a telegram to the militia colonel John Chivington that read, "I want no peace till the Indians suffer more." As a result, Chivington and his troops attacked the Cheyenne and Arapaho at Sand Creek, which included about 200 warriors and 500 women and children. The attack on November 29, 1864, killed over 100 natives, mostly women and children. Elsewhere, the Sioux were facing difficulties with settlers along the Bozeman Trail. The trail ran directly through the Sioux's hunting grounds. The Sioux chief Red Cloud requested that the government stop settlement along the trail. The government refused his request. In December of 1866, the warrior Crazy Horse ambushed American troops led by Captain William J. Fetterman. Over 80 U.S. soldiers were killed in what natives called the Battle of the 100 Slain, and whites called the Fetterman Massacre. Small fights continued until eventually the government agreed to close the Bozeman Trail. However, in return, the Sioux were forced to live on a reservation along the Missouri River. Sitting Bull, leader of one group of the Sioux, refused to sign the Treaty of Fort Laramie, and two others who signed the treaty believed they would still be able to use their traditional hunting grounds. The treaty, however, only provided a temporary peace. In late 1868, war also broke out along the southern plains. The Kiowa and Comanche engaged in a 6 years of raiding that led to the Red River War. The U.S. Army put friendly tribes on reservations and killed anyone who resisted them. General Philip Sheridan ordered the destruction of all villages and ponies, to kill and hang all warriors, and to bring back all women and children. Such policies ended any resistance on the southern plains. Returning to the northern plains, within 4 years of the Treaty of Fort Laramie, gold was discovered in the Black Hills. The Black Hills were within the territory allocated to the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho by the Treaty of Fort Laramie. The tribes requested the United States to cease allowing settlers to enter their territory and search for gold. In 1876, United States troops led by Colonel George Armstrong Custer pursued the tribes in the Black Hills in an attempt to forcibly remove them from the territory in order to allow white settlement. The Sioux and Cheyenne continually moved about the region to avoid the Army. The Army and the Sioux eventually met in June 1876 at the Little Bighorn River. Led by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, warriors crushed Custer's troops. Within an hour, Custer and all of his men and his 7th Cavalry were dead. By the end of the year, though, the Sioux had been defeated. The Sioux continued to suffer. In desperation, they turned to a prophet who promised that if the Sioux performed a ritual ghost dance, that Native American lands and way of life would be restored. The ghost dance movement spread rapidly among the Sioux on the Dakota Reservation. Fearful of a Sioux uprising, the army ordered the arrest of Sitting Bull. In the attempt to arrest him, an officer was shot and Sitting Bull was killed. In December of 1890, the 7th Cavalry rounded up about 350 Sioux and took them to a camp at Wounded Knee Creek. The next day, the soldiers demanded that the Sioux give up their weapons. While weapons were being taken, a shot was fired. The soldiers then opened up fire, including cannons, on the mostly unarmed Sioux people. Within minutes, about 300 Native Americans were killed. The massacre at Wounded Knee brought what became known as the Indian Wars to an end. Also included with the United States Army were African American troops that were deployed on the Great Plains. These African American troops took on the name Buffalo Soldiers. They were specifically the black cavalry that fought during the Indian Wars, but would also become the name used by all black troops in the 1860s and 1870s. Although some Americans supported Native American rights, the government pursued a policy of assimilation. Under assimilation, natives would give up their beliefs and way of life and adopt to the white culture. To encourage assimilation, Congress passed the Dawes Act in 1887. The Dawes Act broke up the reservations and gave some of the reservation land to individual Native Americans. Natives would receive 160 acres of land if they were the head of a household, or 80 acres to each unmarried adult. The remainder of the land, which was what was not claimed by individual natives, would be sold to white settlers, and the income would be used by the Native Americans to buy farm goods. However, Native Americans were tribal, communal people and did not jump at the opportunity to assimilate. As a result, many did not claim the 160 or 80 acres that were offered. By 1932, whites had taken about 2/3 of the territory that had been set aside for Native Americans, and the Native Americans never received any money for the sale of these lands. Perhaps the biggest hit to the Plain Indians, however, though, was the destruction of the buffalo. Hunters and food traders shot buffalo for sport and nearly wiped out the species. In 1800, there were approximately 65 million buffalo living on the Great Plains. By 1890, it was down to around 1,000.